life forms are roaming this planet? Time to find out.
I thought. Or you've got some incredible timing. Regardless, I think it knows you're here. I'll unlock the door. Second floor, main building. But be quiet.
I don't know who that is, but I have a feeling she has our best interests in mind. We should do what she suggests. Don't leave any of that behind. Something's been through here recently, but left everything in place. At least we know it wasn't the Crimson Fleet.
I am. Goodbye.
Got hit harder than I thought. Or you've got some incredible timing. Regardless, I think it knows you're here. I'll unlock the door. Second floor, main building. But be quiet.
But I have a feeling she has our best interests in mind. Something's been through here recently, but left everything in place. At least we know it wasn't the Crimson Fleet. Next time, use your jetpack.
So what do we got here? You're too clean to be one of the settlers. Or a pirate. You see on patrol, maybe? Yeah, make my day if you said you were a shock trooper out for a stroll. Vanguard, huh? Yeah, I expect they didn't. I'm Hadrian. I came here on a rumor of a... What's left of the settlers? The work of Oxysio Machina. A terramorph. One of the nastiest aliens humanity's ever crossed paths with. And this one, well, it's something of an anomaly. Possibly a work. Terramorphs have a unique growth cycle. They're usually only found on worlds that have been long colonized by humanity. But Tao said he's too... I came looking for an explanation and found... Among apex predators, they're the pinnacle. Resilient, agile, smart. And their mental prowess only increases with age. Some can even dominate the minds of weaker species, keeping them as pets, livestock, or toys. Their creature... I sure could. The admin terminal's here in this building, but if you can make it to the security outpost and restore... The settlers outfitted most of the buildings. It's the building in the middle of the facility. The terminal in there should allow you to grant me access to the system as a whole. Then we can see about getting things back online. Good. Once I see the... Take care of yourself out there. And make sure you leave enough... What can I do? Communication restored. I'll make this quick. Plant's turrets took a beating, but I should be able to get you a couple of kill lanes. Just get the thing to chase you down the alleys between the buildings, and you'll lead it right into a crossfire. Hello. I wish I'd found this earlier. Those sensors around the facility? Part of a livestock tracking system. Should let you keep tabs on how close the terramorph is. But it's not connected to this network. There should be a terminal in the adjoining room. Tune it to 183.5.
Interesting.
If you're searching, then maybe.
The radar response the result of quote, an uncorrelated primary anti-beacon target which coincides with the flight crew. That's technically which it sounds like it's actually the new one. An uncorrelated primary and beacon target. So they're basically saying there are two things in the same. Every single radar
Get quick.
Tracker's reading green. What's that sound?
He's active.
Shit. Stop. Stop whatever you're doing and get in cover. It's on the move. Look, I wouldn't engage directly if you can avoid it. The kill lanes. They're set up but need power. There's breakers on each of the buildings you can throw to get them live. Once they're online, lead the terramorph towards the lights and watch the fireworks. Give it hell, Vanguard.
Additional power input required.
This was 19 years ago. Didn't have that much license. We come up with the electronic. Yes, it's power. Maybe not. Just press the button. Opens the shutter, closes the shutter. I don't think there's anything super weird about this. It's definitely unfortunate, a bit weird, but not like aliens interfere with a camera situation. For United plane, saw absolutely nothing. Run anchorage directs to United Airlines passenger aircraft swing by just in time for visual confirmation. The United Airlines crew saw no mothership, no walnut shaped craft, no gigantic objects sent into the aircraft carriers, nothing. The craft described as that massive doesn't just quietly disappear. One plane stops it as another arriving. No, but if it was much smaller than they thought, then yeah, possibly. Interruptions and grounding, routine rotation or deliberate silence. I don't think deliberate silence is what maybe we should have found out about this system. Ground rotation. Type is wrong. Next thing, send it as ground. It was oh, right, yeah. Okay. The research is very doctor. It was eventually right. The kind of scenario that is this and that. So that's and whatever you look at this so it's possible to okay, forward. Aerial school. Starting kids aerial school. Just that's that small town. It rules Broadway. However, what's small like? Expectedly turned into a day. Everyone's considerable much of the run. UFO sightings like believers. The town group is full culture. Most of the systems, it's most of the office. Counseling. There's something wrong. The process. It's like it's outstanding. Generally
Seeing a neat packing facility from the inside is starting to make me feel like I should switch to becoming vegetarian.
it's actually rather unusual. On Fridays, the kids there, house, faculty,
Local defense is restored.
Breakfast like
Online. Additional power required.
Oh shit.
Long way down.
Oh shit. Ah! Ah.
It's a miracle we were able to bring that thing down. At least we avenged the deaths of the colony.
So, what's that? Okay.
Is it really necessary for you to drag around all that gear?
Tracker's gone quiet. I suspect it's either hiding or... Wait, you did it, didn't you? Heavens above! You just flatlined a terrormorph! I'm not too proud. Thank you for saving my ass. You didn't happen to grab me a tissue sample, did you? All right. Spotted a microscope downstairs. Let's see if we can't get to the bottom of this.
End of that. I don't think it's a good approach. I think we should stop humans or the one
Older model. Okay, let's see what you can do. Running basic diagnostics? Nothing. Maybe a flax
It's been
can?
a long time since I've been to Mars. If you have any gear you want me to haul, I'm happy to help.
or that's the situation. Also, they all have very someone said it was black animals, but afterwards, actually just dead animals, dead insects, all that stuff. There any evidence of that? Or was it just saying so later? Also, just because they're adults, it doesn't mean that they don't think it's real. They could have constructed said evidence. Anyway, very skeptical. This is what we convince me. It's definitely not the most likely one that I've ever heard. But that's a good case file. Okay, just for CP, I think that's she's always like to prove UFOs. That's looking for them, it's more likely to find them. So, greatest hope there already. Chiefly the children groups, not the children. This is a fundamental examination of the kids. Heard the jobs. Details and sight of the adults most. Which accounts for this potential children are wired to use their elders. Yes, like this, or essentially a master course and how the rifle was tested before you even started. 100%. Just like what I said. That's what they did. I am too. Right? Things falsely claimed that the kids had no access to TV. This was 1994. The students were predominantly from wealthy middle class white families in Herrera. UFOs were everywhere in structure that we've been discussing in the last weeks. The idea that these kids never encounter the concept of grey alien with black eyes does not hold up. Okay, so yeah, they're aliens, monster like UFOs, more like UFOs.
So long.
Next up, Professor.
This equipment, it's not set up to do a proper analysis of our sample. But this terramorph being, humanity's spread plenty of creatures in our travels across the stars. Pets, livestock, pests. But terramorphs, they're different. To our knowledge, no one's ever spread them intentionally. Yet somehow, they follow us. So when humans settle a world, 70 to 100 years later, terramorphs tend to just appear. No one knows how or why. Dangerous, but at least predictable. Talseti, though, it's too young to have a native population. It's only been colonized 20 years. But then the other option, that someone captured one of the deadliest predators in the galaxy just to wipe out some settlers minding their own business? That seems awfully implausible. Which means we're either looking at a truly strange murder or a faster type of terramorph growth, the results of which could be catastrophic. Terramorph outbreaks have taken down far bigger colonies than this one. Well, they're not exactly buying tickets and flying coach. The theory is that they're spread by some kind of egg or seed that's able to evade our detection. But how the hell an undetectable egg turns into a terramorph without anyone noticing is a question no one's ever found an answer to. And it's why what's happened here could be real bad news for the rest of human civilization. You're right. We don't have enough information. Time was, I had access to one of the best repositories of terramorph research in the galaxy. Seems a natural place to start looking, if I can figure how to access it. But we also need to get this sample properly analyzed, get confirmation on just how concerned we should be. Luckily, I think I know just the person to help with the sample. What would you say to delivering this to him for me? Yeah, I'd do it myself, but I need to call in some favors. See if I can't get access to that terramorph data. Plus, maybe just pop by a hospital for a little bit. Clear it with your commander first if you have to. You can even show them this. My gene tag. Tell them Hadrian Sanan is worried there could be more attacks on the horizon. They should recognize the name. I was. Long time ago. Family tradition. But I know some of the folks in my old unit moved into the Vanguard. A couple even owe me favors. If I'm lucky, your commander is one of them. Oh, you don't understand what a weight off my shoulders that is. I need Dr. Percival Walker to put together a sample analysis for this thing. Full workup. He'll know what that means. I'm not sure exactly where to find him, but last I heard he was contracting with the Trade Authority on Mars. There's a place called the Sixth Circle in Sidonia. Bar run by some old friends. I'll meet you and Percival there. And here. It's not a lot, but you've definitely earned it. Should cover the cost of fuel to Mars at least. Now please go check in with your commander. We need to know what we're dealing with.
Yes, we are.
Okay, finally it's done. Clear the go past in 2017, I started video showing unidentified test 5 years aroused using living daylight. Other fashions price red reports from this ground like Japanese pirates. Footage released mostly footage by the most general public. So many figures it was not Gary the next so I'm trying to get some of the ratings. One of them mentioned that the new getting so Frank is very place. What the great art below. On still procedural. Turn it off, turn it on again. Really? The jumps is still there. The great art is sometimes around 80,000 listens and technologies. Which the first person ran around 150 years. Documents with simplicity didn't mention art, suspicious service, and books. Curious about books. Books is old-fashioned. And all the time, books show
They have these jetpacks.
perhaps the other arguments were not so much as the stars. Source of books to drawings. What led to the doctor directions one also put up very considerably time six levels, straight okay, whatever the temperature has been for operation specialists. This is yes, this is identifying carry close to each other. Most important, whatever it is by November 14th, the spring showed 14. Since there was they managed to release directly directions against the figure first line
Captain Thompson, how can I be of service? I am ready to commence a trade.
Get close and look. Pray the Lord to save. Can't suddenly be service and descended rapidly. You were in Fragrance, like passing. Then it seemed possible as it vanished. Fragrance described the shape of the Genesis blue reverse from the midline horizontal axis is around 46 feet long. Fortunately, it's all happened far too far away from the Princeton for even boys to power the binoculars to see, so the crew of the carrier could only listen to the infections chatter. I'm afraid the craft is the delay.
Let me know if I can be of assistance in the future.
Aerospace, also, far outsourced. However, pilots for what your actions and so as the assistance. Of course, the business left in the dark, so the same used to be on this aircraft. Underwood was wondering if the capture symbol on this area vehicle just the same. According to Goodens, it's bullshit. Usually, but Underwood couldn't spot it. The object was also the object was rapidly dancing. So swallowed. The object Most of the group is small. One that looks to describe things also, video will eventually show up on yours. The original was much clearer than also saw the current dynamic beyond the presence is the rich world. Something Mars as yours. Spirit of students using and those that's it. Overall, the things four sets of during naval exercise, the rest of the military happiness the rest unidentified aerial phenomena, black holes, on April the 27th, 2020, maybe finally released 3 videos on its information page on the day of September. The footage actually was supposed to be seen on the journey. But since the videos were already out there, damage was done. The alien was out of the bag. Filling the including the trust videos and official videos here on NBC seconds. 6 years later, there's still classification. Alright, let's do this. This is way more than the last but this is where something wants to the person Johnson Anyway, let's go to those things. Let's find out. David Fraser directly contradicts the most dramatic claims. Okay. The VFA 41 Squadron was actually there. Goes on record pushing back against the constant reporting of versions of the system. One certainty is I think both I reject.
I'll keep an eye out for hostile life forms.
Hello, Captain.
Okay, that's not really to us. This is an illusion. Go faster, looks like an object, across the let's get to the object is mostly slow. So we go for 30 minutes. It's quite regulated information. Just as you're going to critical selection of objects makes the vast location settings apply. When you apply that to trigonometry, so questions. Okay. The famous rotations already became this. To give these videos a small is where the object appears to rotate in convention could. But it's almost certainly not the object that looks at all. It was demonstrated for a camera's own internal glare as it rotates its movements against the stage. It was the smaller than points, but burns individuals. When a gimbal reaches 30 degrees for a drag, it says, take this. By suggests the internal rotates the camera's rotation. This will strike with a predicted rotation. The rotation is features is right predicted rotation. The object is the camera's rotation. Flying source.
So, what have we got? Animal, vegetable, or mineral?
Hard drives. Or again, just possibly. Yeah, right, it happens. So something you've read about mysterious mineral, like in a voltage of 9 times, state data records. That's not usually. It does. And it happens every 2 years. The planes. But I think it's like it's frames. Just like, no, that didn't actually happen. It's generally just the other things it's there. It's very young, just get them right. But that's what this is going to be. But the mundane reality is this. US Navy operates strict data security and classification protocols. Wiping and reloading the data records after exercises, particularly exercises and classified systems, this capability is standard procedure. That's why they specific kids want to do together. 2 guys showing that hardware. The training exercise is trained by the feedback article. Okay, so also thoughts. So even if the people who did show up, still that's what it is.
You tell her Nathan still hasn't come home since after school.
In one of his most celebrated passages, the Greek historian Thucydides acknowledges that there are 3 If you're into your military history, it's a phrase that you will hear repeated quite a bit. Lots of conflict across the centuries. But what if there's a 4th reason this makes to one far less deep than those performed by Thucydides. What if states can also go to war by mistake? That's the theory of former Major General in the British Army, Dr. Anthony Jones. That rather than entering combat for easily explainable reasons, the greatest threat facing NATO today is that it falls into a vast conflict almost by accident. Now, how likely that really is, we will leave on side, but certainly extremist nitty-gritty examples. Just off the top of my head, I would make a good case that World War I was the result of multiple marching towards conflict without realising that was what we were doing until it was too late to stop. But while this was for me to take away from us, it was far from the only one. Over the course of an hour, we spoke about all sorts of stuff extremely relevant to fans of this channel. from town-wide British military downsized so drastically after 9/11. All the shortages of key warfighting units with a tolerance and confidence will break out tomorrow. In fact, that section was so detailed and terrifying that we briefly considered titling this video.
Hello? Hey, Nate, where are you?
We also talked about a little old lady.
You where?
Wait, is mom home?
No, I can't get a hold of her. I'm trying to. Still doesn't have her phone yet.
Wait. Wait, where you with?
I'm with nobody. I'm at the house, Nathan. Where are you?
I'm at Burger King.
I don't have any money I can send you. I don't. What do you want me to do?
No. I'm not asking for that. I'm just plugging my scooter and trying to get a hold of my mom.
Yeah, she doesn't have her phone still.
Alright.
Alright?
Bye.
Okay, just come home, please, when you can.
I'll be home before your mom.
Yeah, well, be home well before my mom. She's been home since after school.
To chase up convenience, which is nice. Something I'll already into a various mention. Quite a bit of videos coming up. You've also been very kind to connect us with various people that have been yes. Also, your background.
He just called me from Snapchat,
You also have a PhD in strategic leadership.
saying he's at Burger King charging his scooter.
Culture and an academic. I'm sure I have lots to say, and I have lots of questions. I thought we'd lead with
Trying to get a hold of his mom.
if that's start with a hardball, but then a big question.
I told him to get home as soon as possible.
NATO will be involved in a major war in the next 10 years.
I think you're right, a big question. And I guess it's into two parts, doesn't it? Because part one of that would be how likely is it that countries, a country or countries within NATO might be involved in a big war within the next 10 years. Part two of that is the, if you like, what people are shortening to a shorthand of Article 5, what, the Article 5...
He said he'd be home before my mom. I would hope so. It's 9:30. He hasn't been home once. Since lunch.
Just the first part is highly likely, isn't it? Because already there are those within NATO and certainly on the periphery of NATO involved in a major war. I think that certainly the northern half of the NATO states would say they're already on the edge of one. I think that the southern states of NATO, for example, would say,
as soon as possible.
Very much on the edge of one as well. And America, the big dog in NATO,
He hasn't been home since
very
lunch.
much involved in a war at the moment. Whether you would call that a big war or not, I don't know. But certainly those on the ground, on the receiving end of it, very much feel that it's a pretty intense war right now, even in the ceasefire. So I think the short and tight answer to part one is, I think already there are
you guys coming back tonight?
So NATO collectively, which is I think the point of your question, NATO together as an entity saying, okay, so this is an Article 3 stroke Article 5 most moment, the threshold has been crossed. Nations are now under attack and are defending themselves. Article 3 and therefore Article 5, we're all in this together, and NATO is at war. I think that the unpredictable politics and events of the last 3 or 4 years have made that a much harder question to answer than it would have been under exactly the circumstances we now find ourselves absent the war in Iran. If the US administration were behaving differently and more predictably, and either differently in a way that is what we all become used to, and is very much bound into European security and NATO security in a way that, frankly, everybody had taken for granted, against which Trump and company rail with a degree of justification. America, not Trump, but America in general, saying you are taking things for granted, therefore we are going to stand back from our NATO commitment in some shape or form. If either of those two circumstances
Painful memories.
Don't
then they are
It's good to be
very
home.
much easier. The problem is that the leader of the free world is somebody who just really good, who has thrived in everything that he has done in making himself as unpredictable as possible. Those on one extreme say it's because the man's an uncontrollable lunatic. Those on the other extreme would say on the contrary. This is exactly how he says he's going to behave, how he behaves, and how he does so well in his endeavours by keeping people off balance. And because
I don't know what she wants me to do in this situation. He's not my kid. He's not going to listen to me.
That revolves around being unpredictable, either by mistake or deliberately, doesn't matter, frankly. It makes answering that question very difficult. However, at the risk of being trite, I would say that to trot out an old maxim, Thucydides is famously quoted as having said that mankind will only enter war for one of three reasons: fear, honour, or interest. And that's understood that's the time over a couple of thousand years, but I always added a thought by mistake. And I would say that actually, if you look at the history of warfare, by mistake is how an awful lot of nations have come tumbling into wars that they didn't intend. And my view is that within the next 10 years, and within the last 2 years, we would have predicted that we are where we are now a couple of years. So I would say that in the next 10 years, the likelihood of NATO as an entity, either in its current form or in some form, being drawn into a large conflict has grown enormously over the last 2 or 3 years.
So to put the US aside for NATO powers, do you think they're not maybe a war involving the United States and NATO, but what do you think the possibility for that for
another zoning meeting at Bath has resulted in
I don't want to put a percentage on it.
several areas currently zoned as residential are
I
seeking
think
to
it's more
allow
likely than
small
it
business.
was previously. I
This
also think
seemingly
that
simple
the
request
less
has brought bitter
clear
controversy that seems no
American
closer to resolution.
Euro
After one
is,
meeting was broken
the
up
more
by a
likely
shouting
the war
match
in Europe
between
becomes.
citizens on both sides of the
Terrence
issue,
works on
the
the
matter was moved to a closed-door proceeding.
classic Terrence
But
theory.
even
It works
that
on the
could
ground
not resolve
that
the
you've
matter.
got something that somebody's frightened of, and they think that they do as likely to use it if they do whatever you don't want them to do.
if he goes away, especially?
So if you have less that they're frightened of, and they don't believe that it's likely to do,
December holiday joy.
people, it doesn't matter whether it's Putin or anybody else, theoretically, if people are not deterred, people are more likely to make warlike decisions. And I think that we are in a place now where deterrence is less certain, it's less clear, it's more ambiguous than it has been probably in all of our lives.
Look who's back. All set with that probationary mission? We can do your debrief and formally welcome you into the Vanguard whenever you're
I think a
ready.
degree of uncertainty
Me?
has been
6,
inserted.
7
And
years
as I
now?
say, we can have
Was a recon squad commander in a former life, so it wasn't too big a jump bossing around foreign pilots instead. The Vanguard's been a quality assignment. Meet new people, judge them on
Where do you think those mistakes, if you had to
a terror.
really
What?
flashpoints?
How did you walk away with the terramorph tissue sample running comms repairs? What happened to the settlers?
All of us in this business got out the
You
usual
killed
flashpoints. I
a
think
terramorph.
those three
your
states
first
that
mission.
they call the Baltic states because that lumps
If I
them
could be
together
frank
and they
for a
all see
moment,
themselves right
holy
as being
shit.
independent entities
Above
with their
and
own
beyond doesn't really
identities,
begin to describe it now,
all
does it?
vulnerable.
Earned yourself some
and know that
serious
they
hazard pay
are.
on this one.
Finland
But,
feels pretty vulnerable,
if none of
and
the
kind
settlers
of is,
made it,
but kind of isn't.
who's got you delivering
Probably
the
has been there
sample?
before and God bloody knows. But they are absolutely of the view, if you see
Researcher.
things, that
Let me
they
see
need to be
that.
absolutely ready as a nation, and actually are
Sonar.
ready mentally as a
I know
nation to be in arms and to
Let me
deal
check
with
the
this as they have
database.
before. Poland
A lot of this data's been classified.
very recently.
Here we go.
Poland absolutely feels,
Service
hey, you know, we're Polish, this is the
Wow.
way it happens, we understand how
That's
this
a lot of
works.
commendations.
And we just look at our history.
Seems like she's
Here
serving
we
the
go
station
again.
as
So I think that
Co-head
where
of the
you are
UC
in the
Xenoweapons
Czech
Division
Republic northwards,
faced tribunal
I
at the end
think
of the
that there's a
colony.
fairly steady
Was dismissed from duty.
line of
Guess
right
that's why I'd heard the name
concerned
before.
people.
If she's for
All of
Xeno
whom,
warfare,
for a variety
though,
of reasons.
well,
And you'll
can at
see
least be
that
sure she knows her aliens.
Putin approached to Parliament to get justification for protecting Russian citizens made into law only last week, I think.
I'm sure she doesn't listen at the top of her
Makes the hair
resume.
stand on end if you're sitting
Considering
in
her
Estonia
service
or
record
Latvia or
and her area of expertise,
Yeah. And it
I'm
definitely
not seeing a
seems
reason to
that
think this
kind of
request is anything other than genuine.
the closer you get
Did your
to
survivor,
that,
Hadrian,
the
she mentioned why she thinks this sample's so
the
special?
more worried people are, like Ireland and especially Finland, as mentioned, obviously. Any other flashpoints? Anything outside
I
of
see.
Europe you see as a potential point?
This has been one of the more surprising debriefs I've ever been a... I did actually have another mission lined up for
Hungary
you,
is
supporting
interested at the
UC
moment.
system
I'm not
defense against the
entirely
Crimson
sure
Fleet.
that the
Now
demise
I guess you have two
of
options on how to proceed.
I
Head to the
the way
UC
that
Vigilance
people
and
are
help out
saying, but
SysDef, or
change-
deliver that sample.
and I'm not
I'll make sure you've got the
entirely sure
proper
it's a change
clearances
of
for either
regime
path.
either.
Consider
But
these
it
your
is a
first
change of
official orders.
certainly
And here,
time for something
Vanguard's
new.
also got some custom ship
But
modifications.
I
You can have access to them next time you're down at the spaceport. Just for services. Now, if there wasn't anything else, I'd suggest you move out.
Europe, so I'm not sure about that. The wallman disappearing has certainly made a bit of a difference to that dynamic. And of course, everything that's happening in the Middle East at the moment, from the central Mediterranean as far as the subcontinent, is involving all of us economically, at least, and many nations in much more concrete terms than that.
Ah,
So I think
Captain.
there's a very
Congratulations on
persuasive
joining the ranks of the Vanguard.
instability, isn't there? That we need to
Captain,
watch and worry.
can I help you?
There's more potential flashpoints all the time.
This is Mast, the beating heart of the United Colonies. Every decision made in the civilized galaxy takes place inside these walls.
Post 9/11 optimize arguing against the optimization of militaries towards counterinsurgency. And I think that's the thing that is being felt by militaries as a regret today. I'm wondering what you saw in those post 9/11 years as that was happening, and why. What did you think the militaries were missing?
I think in general, militaries have kind of two responsibilities. One is to deal with the job that they've been given at the moment, the now job. And the other is to do their best to train and prepare for the big job, the raison d'etre. So the purpose, let's stick with an army for a moment, but it applies to navies and air forces. The purpose of the army is to be ready as possible to fight and win a nation's wars on and from. It doesn't matter which army you are.
Enjoy your time in New Atlantis.
The purpose of the army is not necessarily to export your capacity for violence elsewhere, to support the nation's interests in whatever way. That's kind of extra bonus, if you like. So if the nation decides that for whatever reason, whether it's to support a strong ally, whether it's because you're directly threatened, whether it's a combination of those things, whether it's to further economic, it doesn't matter. But if the nation decides that it wishes to use its military at reach to have effect, that is a side order from the core purpose of that military. And so every military ought to say, I've got the capacity to go and do what you're asking me to do, minister, president, leader, whoever, while at the same time, it is my duty as a military person to maintain our capability, our ability to furnish you with your necessity to deliver the first duty of any government, which is the security of its nation. And therefore my first duty is to deliver our core purpose, which is to be ready to fight and win the nation's wars on the land. Now, what happened during that period, and it wasn't a uniquely British experience.
No, I'm not feeling that
The
bad.
French were doing the same, the Americans were doing the same, actually against the resistance of the American army, which would say precisely what I'm saying, getting a degree of flack from the British army for saying. But a number of armies were saying, look, the army is so big, but that's what we've got to put all of our effort into. And I think the British Army went one step further than most. And they made a deliberate decision for the commitment to Afghanistan of entirety. And they made that decision. It was you normally have a random name generator for operations that the British Army does. In this case, it didn't. It was a decision to choose that name for the commitment, to make it clear that this is what we need to put up. The entirety of our effort is
Up entirety, so everything in the army was focused towards capturing insurgency away from what garrisons had made.
Of course, it wasn't, but by calling it that, it made it crystal clear that this is where the bulk of our effort needs to lie.
People there tend to be.
And that's absolutely fair.
Yes,
because
have a look.
the bulk of the British Army's effort at that time did need to lie there. I'm going to say I buried 21 of my kids from the war in Afghanistan. Absolutely, that's where the core of our focus of our effort was, and it needed so to be in order to succeed there. And that's a different discussion that we can have later if you want. But in terms of military success, it's very different from strategic outcomes. So in terms to succeed with the job that had been given to the British Army, they needed to do. But by calling it off entirety, what it meant in the conceptual space was that a lot of people stopped thinking about that other job of militaries, which is to continue to be ready to fight and win the nation's wars on land. And that meant that the big muscle movements of war, conceptually, were being ignored, but it also meant that if you're not thinking in that space, you allow yourself to be denuded both morally and physically, the other two pieces of what constitutes doing war, at the same time. And if you do that, you get an army that's not ready when you stop doing your counterinsurgency to do the core job. If you do it the other way around and concentrate on being able to do the heavy lifting stuff, then you can do the other thing if you're required to, with a bit of change of mind and change of preparation. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. Do you think, what's the feeling in the army, British Army these days now that we're seeing more clearly what could be in the future and what's in the past? I know you're retired, but at Chase it's the think tank for the British Army. Is there a level of regret, or what's the sentiment there currently?
I think there are a number of sentiments. I think the first thing I'd say is that there's a crystal clear recognition of what I've just articulated. Starting with General Riley Walker, who's got absolutely clear vision and has had, and throughout, despite his own personal history and engagement in that other kind of warfare, he absolutely understands that his job, the core purpose is exactly as described, and it's his job to be able to deliver that, and that has his focus, as it does all of his generals, and as it does everybody else, I think, right down to the newest joined private soldier. So I think in terms of do we now recognise what our job is as a British Army, I think the answer would be that they would say, yes, absolutely, we recognise that, thank you very much, and we're getting on with it as best as we can. But that's not at the core of your question, is it? You're asking how they feel. And I think that almost because of that recognition, the British Army is saying, yeah, but look, if you want us to be able to do that, and boy, do we want to be able to do that, then we need, I think, two things on a big scale. We need a nation that understands that that is our job and is prepared to be part of that in whatever form that takes, to support us in that. And support us rather more than just turning up in November wearing a poppy and saying, poor old you, but genuinely to put a national shoulder to the wheel. And we need resource in all sorts of ways, which allows us to be equipped so to do. And if you put those two things together, then all of the technological ambition, the new ways of fighting, the new ways of thinking about, all of that can fall into place. Absent those things, it's difficult.
I think that it's easier to understand the concept of resources, okay, more money to an army allows an army to do more things. How, in an ideal world, would you change the perception of how people see things? You mentioned that what you would like the nation to understand that the job of an army is exactly what you described. In your ideal world, how would you go about changing that? What would you do?
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? Gosh, I mean, I think there are a number of things. The first one would be, and I'm paraphrasing the British Army's first Army Sergeant Major here. Cast your mind back to the Wood and Bassett days, where those internal convoys and hearses would go through that village in Wiltshire. Is it Wiltshire? In the west of England, southwest of England, wherever it is.
Don't test my geography.
It's near the M4 in the southwest England, Wiltshire, I think. Anyway, we'd go through Wood and Bassett, and there would be crowds of people who had absolutely no connection with the unfortunate individuals in those hearses, let alone the military or anything else, who would line the streets in sympathy. And because of a whole raft of societal reasons and changes in the size and structure and changes in recruitment, all sorts of things, the number of people who had an understanding of the military, not just the army, but the military in general, in Britain, had shrunk considerably over the period since the 50s, 60s, 70s, and ever smaller as time marched on. The army got smaller, etc., etc. And what the Army Sergeant Major used to say when he was talking to audiences, he would give less talk, but in a slightly sort of maudlin sort of way. He would say, you don't understand. I do not want your sympathy, neither do my soldiers. We want your empathy. And I thought that was a great line. And I was the chairman of the Poppy Factory, which is a national British veterans charity for a while, and I stole his line unashamedly, because I think it's a great line.
It's a good line.
So I think that, and part of that lies on the military, doesn't it? Because if somebody is ill-informed, part of that lies with the person who can't be bothered to find out, the informee, and part of that lies with the informer. So making people better understand the need without scaremongering, without making people frightened, but the need is important. And making people understand in a way that they can empathise, rather than just seeing soldiers as victims, which is profoundly unhelpful in all sorts of ways. That I think is step one.
It is interesting. I feel since the war in Ukraine began, there's been a bigger conversation. I'm not sure if you've also done before, but certainly I've come across it more about people's willingness to serve. Like, I can't remember, I don't have the data in front of me, but it'd be a question like, if there was an existential threat to your nation, would you be willing to serve? And I think, if I'm not mistaken, the numbers are lower than they've ever been. And I'm just wondering, what do you think has changed in society? Because I've thought about this a lot, and all of the answers that come into my mind end up being quite unsatisfying. I was wondering if you have an idea about what has changed in society. Is it just we've had such a long period of peace? Is it that doesn't feel satisfying?
No, it's not satisfying, but I think that's close to the core of the I nearly said problem there, but boy are we lucky. And we are a profoundly blessed generation, aren't we? All of us, from those now in their 70s down to people being born today. God willing that it stays that way. But for those who've lived for 75 years or less, we have all known nothing in Britain other than a state of security and peace. And fine, our economy has done that over the years and decades. We've been more or less prosperous. But what we haven't been is threatened physically or even existentially at all in that 80-year period. And that means that most of us Brits who are currently alive, and it applies to an awful lot of Europe as well.
Yeah.
It applies to America as well.
If you go by Burger King, tell your brother to get his butt home. Okay, good.
Have existed absent of military threat to them. And therefore it's unsurprising if the understanding of that threat and of the consequences of not dealing with that threat have if that applies to all the people governing you too, and that includes actually in American and British governments at the moment, those who have served in uniform, they have served in uniform, but they've served in uniform in the sort of conflicts we were talking about earlier, which are exporting the problem abroad as opposed to dealing with it existentially at home. And so I think that it is unsurprising that you've got an entire generation of folk who don't see that they are directly threatened, because it is almost literally inconceivable, because they've never had to conceive it.
We are so far removed from it. My experience, very much in post-Cold War, would be my grandmother talking about rationing at the end of the Second World War, because she was young during the Second World War. That is my only second experience. It's over. I'm a light-age person. I am so far
your turn.
from the concept of prisoner war.
Yeah. Well, it's a story I dropped out, and I wish I could re-find it, but I was doing research many years ago, and sat for days in an archive looking at oral histories that were taken from all sorts of people that had been involved in the Second World War, from platoon commanders to politicians to all sorts. And one of the interviews was the most extraordinary old lady who had been an SOE agent in the Second World War, but was the sweetest, most wonderful, was the special officer
that?
fought alongside resistance.
No, it was Ryan. It was Ryan.
Parachuted in
So
and sadly,
yeah, he slept.
But this wonderful lady was serving the interviewer, who was an academic, with scones and jam and a cup of tea in the bone china. It was utterly sweet and lovely, and was chattering away about her experience. And she'd be in the Special Operations Executive and was talking quite lively about strangling people with sheet wire and shooting people, and yet this barbarous, frail old lady, as polite and kind and nice, would you like another cup of tea, dear? Whilst in the middle of some ghastly story. And she used the term several times, this blessed generation, when the interviewer asked her whether, and he was asking a question in a rather sort of morally probing way. Do you think what you did was worth it? Was the core of what he was asking. And her reply kept sort of referring to, well, I think so, because look at this wonderfully blessed generation. And eventually he said, I'm sorry, I've got to try and unpack that. What do you mean by it? And I'm paraphrasing her here, but what she said made a deep impression on me. She said, well, I think they are blessed, aren't they? Because it seems to me that young people nowadays, by which I think she meant anybody 50 years old or younger, the young people nowadays, they seem so anxious, don't they? They seem so worried. Certainly my grandchildren and great-grandchildren, they're so anxious. But if you ask them what really bothers them, it seems the thing they're most worried about is that others should see them as they see themselves. How blessed they are that that's all they need to worry about. Oh, I thought, what? On so many levels, that makes the hair stand up on the back of your neck. You think, wow, gosh, okay. And the advocate who was interviewing her just sort of sat there in quiet and said something. I'm going to need to digest that. And she said something like, well, I hope it's easy to digest in my scones. And they moved on to the next thing. And it was just left hanging in the air. And I think the point of that ramble is that I think that now, sadly, even her wonderful generation have now got that understanding of the difference between what we think of as hardship. Oh my God, my internet's gone down for half an hour, how am I going to work? With genuine hardship. And the fact that, and I'm going to wrongly use the word, but the most ordinary of people, like that wonderful lady, who clearly was the most extraordinary of people, but the most ordinary of people who would otherwise have lived a quiet little life in Potterington in the depths of the West Country, had found her moment and done her thing. in a way that's almost inconceivable now. I guess
Not enough.
all of those ordinary people will find their way into doing extraordinary things in the way that they always have. Not just in Britain, but in France, where I grew up, and in Germany and in Poland and everywhere else. I think your question was about willingness, and I suspect that that blessed generation would tell you now that they were unwilling, but I suspect if you pushed their back to the wall, they would become much more willing. And the only reason that they tell you that they're unwilling is because the questions...
What is it? From the mixed up files of the Basil C. Frankenweiler?
Their experience, their parents' experience,
Mixed up files.
have meant that it is literally an inconceivable state of affairs.
Yeah, you mentioned earlier about, Joe checking the way that people feel about the army, the empathy rather than sympathy, and getting to understand what the army's for. I think we've seen conflicts in the past where suddenly there is clearly national events, and the polls are wrong, the government's like this. This is happening now, and suddenly a huge amount of efforts through politics or whatever you want to call it. At that time, it's like, we need to think, come on, let's get up and get going. And we've seen, I don't think people are fundamentally different today than they were 100 years ago. It's the people, and I think I imagine you're right, but the back is against the wall, the polls are probably not.
Yeah, absolutely. And if I can just add as a bonus to that, and say back to the previous question, if armies have been doing their first duty in the lean times when they're too lean to be able to do that first duty and are concentrating on something else, if they've been doing that first duty and mentally preparing themselves and training as if they were huge and had everything that they could possibly want, then suddenly when the tide turns and the necessity hits, those armies become much readier, much more prepared, much more able to absorb that influx of willing people to stand up and be counted than those that have not done that first duty and concentrated entirely on the second duty. And my argument with the army at the time, and I was in it at the time, didn't make myself popular by having that view. My argument with the army at the time was, surely you can see that one day we might find ourselves in a position where we're required to do the first duty, and anyway, that's our purpose. And therefore, that's where we need to think about wargaming, about doctrine, about procurement, just-in-case planning, about all of those things. And the answer was, look, it's great, Carl, yeah, I get it, but what you've got to understand is this is so all-absorbing that it needs to absorb all. And I understood that too, but it still irritated.
In a military situation like that, is it politicians making the decisions on where the military is putting the attention, or is it more the top military brass?
It's a combination. The simple answer to your question is it's the military making decisions for itself. Of course it is. And any civil servant or politician will give you that answer, and rightly so. But of course, no decisions by senior military folks are made without context. And if your context is, so take for example Northern Ireland, which was in a different way, precisely the set of circumstances that were described, but in a different context. So Northern Ireland was an operation that the British Army could not afford to lose in any shape or form, which the nation could not afford to lose in any shape or form, and was much more core to the heart of the nation than operations in Iraq or Afghanistan or anywhere else for this. And therefore was, like, as much or more, I suspect, of entirety than Afghanistan ever was, or Iraq ever was. But the army was sufficiently large at that time, with sufficient capacity, and sufficiently concentrated on its core business because it felt, and the nation felt, because we were in the centre of the Cold War, that the threat was real and existential. But it had the capacity to say, okay, we'll be getting on with Northern Ireland and making sure that we succeed there, whilst maintaining the ability to switch, because we have to, that's what NATO demands of us, that's what we also demand of etc. if the context is such that your resource is such that the military leadership feels it is faced with an either-or question, then it's up to them to make the decision. But make that decision while, in my view, robustly going back to the politician and saying, and the civil servant, and saying, we have made this decision, but we wish to make it on record with you, because you must take ownership of it, because you are providing the context in which we make the decision.
Yeah, I asked the question because in my mind, the military would have a longer context. They'd have people serving for decades, whereas politicians can come and go. And have insurgency, war on terror, even as long as it was, is shorter term than what you're describing as what the whole military would be preparing for. And yeah, I just where that short term isn't seems to come from. I'm just surprised you got so much pushback from the military itself on the idea of the army doing the army.
So I don't wish to think myself up just as a voice in the wilderness. I think that the pushback was not, you're the only person with that view. The pushback was, yeah, okay, pal, we all get that. We've got it. Thank you very much for your view. You'll think that's helpful. Because we all understand that. But you must go to the dirty drives and these underneath, so get on board and get with the program. To which my answer is, I will be absolutely on board with the program because I completely hold with your view that this is something in which we must tactically and operationally succeed. Someone else's responsibility to make sure it's a strategic success, but tactically and operationally we'll succeed. I'm with you. Nevertheless, I'd like you to find some capacity, if you wouldn't mind, to do the thinking about the other stuff.
You mentioned earlier resources, and I'm wondering, what do you think now, after all that's happened, the change of direction that the army took? What do you think is the weakest part of the army now? Is it to do with manpower? Is it to do with supplies and equipment? Where would you say that lies?
I would say everywhere. And it's an unhelpful answer, but it is so. The old maxim.
Well, to phrase it another way, then, if the British Army went to war today, what do you think the first thing that would break would be? Where do you think the first point of failure would be?
I'm not sure, because again, it's and I'm not avoiding the question. So the army's got stuff. It's very short of artillery. Certainly tube artillery, 1.5mm tube artillery, because it's given almost all of that to Ukrainian army. And that artillery is short of ammunition because the British defence industry has not been encouraged to produce an enormous amount because it hasn't needed to, etc., etc. So there's an artillery problem, there's an air defence problem, there's an combat engineering problem, there's an armoured infantry problem, there's a light infantry problem across the board, because if you have had to make a series of choices over a long period of time, years, and even with an arbitrarity, those responsible for the custodianship of the army have had, and I'm unfairly characterising their inability to think about it. Of course, they had their mind on that responsibility, and they were saying, we've got to have air defence. We can't rely on someone else. We've got to have combat engineers because you need it, and you need this, and you need that. Oh, and there are new ideas 10 years ago. I think we need to start thinking about drones, etc., etc. So all of that thinking goes on all the time, and any responsible general would say, but look, I can't take my armoured brigade to war unless it's got artillery, unless it's got air defence, unless it's got cyber, and because and by the way, it needs to be able to plug into our Air Force, and on occasion our Navy, and everybody else's, and. And as long as you've got a requirement for a scale, let's call it a division, you need to equip that thing with a bit of everything. And the problem is that bit has reached the point now where the bit's not enough to do the job even at the micro level, let alone the macro level. So what the army is saying, I think, is on two levels, we need to explain what we need to be able to fight. On one level, we need to exploit the curve of technology. On the other level, we need to get all of those things that we know we need numbers of. And because they're absent, just numbers of individual soldiers, let alone all of the equipment, because they're absent, because we've got some of them, but we haven't got enough of them across the piece, I can't really answer your question because there are so many, for that whole proverb, there are so many nails missing from horseshoes all over the place that there are all sorts of points to go there, I think.
There's only going to be ever limited amounts of money coming in, never enough, I assume. In a situation where you do have the technology to explore life cycle of drones, and then on the other hand, artillery, Sony artillery, trained artillery to be part of that. How do you, how is that decision made?
Cleaned up and everything? I hope so.
I understand that it's needed everywhere, they want to go everywhere. So is it a matter of we have to provide equally, or do you think, for example, Ukraine is heavily concerned with the drones in Russia as well, everywhere as well. How do you make a decision that, with the stuff that is needed in the future and the stuff that's needed now, that there's a limited pot?
Gosh, well, that you're asking me to describe the entire force development process.
I don't think it's talk to a journalist.
Next general. So you do a bunch of, in simplest terms, you do a bunch of analysis which looks at all of your experience, starting with swords and shields and working your way up to where you are now, and you explore the Clausewitzian nature that never changes and the Clausewitzian character which changes all the time, and you then read Sir Michael Howard and decide that you need to make the best guess that you possibly can, but know that you're going to be wrong in the guess that you made, and all of that stuff. And you have a directorate of futures, whatever that is, in your headquarters that has the war games and examines context and examines technology and looks at what you have research and development in all sorts of different things in all sorts of different armies. You look at current context and current wars, and you make your best guess at what the next thing is likely to be like, informed by the fact, as I say with Michael Howard, that you are going to be wrong, and therefore need to build in the flexibility that you can, whatever flexibility that you can to adjust, and mental flexibility to be ready to adjust when you find out what it is that you are actually engaged with. And you used Ukraine as an example. I think if you are shallow in your analysis of Ukraine, you would say that the next war is quite clearly going to be all about drones. If you are slightly more involved in your analysis of Ukraine, you'd say, for sure, drones are going to be involved, but it's not going to be all about drones, because Ukraine is all about drones. It's about trenches too, and that's got a horrible familiarity to an old infantryman. It's about battle tanks. It's about, as you just said, an enormous place for artillery. And by the way, drones aren't new.
It gets remarkable to play a delicate way. If you had asked them 10 years ago, I was literally companies from someone like you, for example, but that there would be mass casualty wars at the same time that we've got drones, I'd be like, wait, are the drones fighting or are the men fighting? It's like, no, there's both. Russia is still sending tens of thousands of people to their deaths constantly in waves. And it just seems so odd to me. These things seem so contradictory. And you literally just said that you would be wrong trying to guess what's the future of war. But I'd love you to guess anyway. Do you think it'll be, and if it's not, if it's not drones, is it trenches, is it artillery, is it just...
So I think that probably is a bit of a bit right. The trigones I guess was supposed to by this test, and I'm afraid that is the answer. It depends. And what is, if the war in Iran continues or breaks how is that going to be characterised? Well, you can make all sorts of guesses, can't you? You've been doing quite a lot recently on what it would take to take Shark Island, and that ain't going to be drones, that's for sure. Are they going to be involved? That's for sure. So yeah, I don't know. It's hard to say. But I think we have a tendency to get fixated on the novelty in water. And by we, I mean analysts like you or I, or those people in uniform, or the scientists, we get fixated on novelty. We realise we've invented a machine gun, and we concentrate on the capability of the machine gun and how useful that's going to be. And we either hang on to the old ideas at our peril, or we ditch the old ideas entirely at our peril. And it's those that understand that it's kind of a mixture of all of the above, of the constant and the changing, who tend to come out better earlier. They don't necessarily win in the end, but they tend to come out better earlier. And I would say that when you're asking me to guess what the next war, and you asked earlier on in 10 years, let's say there's a war in 10 years in which NATO is involved. Is it going to involve aircraft carriers, frigates, submarines of all sorts, destroyers, etc.? Absolutely it is. Is it going to involve a hybrid navy full of unmanned aerial, surface and subsurface vehicles? Absolutely it is. Is it going to involve air forces, manned and unmanned? Of course it is. Is it going to involve space, cyber, etc.? Of course it is. Is it going to involve people with sharpened shovels and bayonets on land making final decisions? Of course it is. Will there be lots of them? Too bloody right there will. Will it involve main battle tanks and artillery and absolutely, and drones, absolutely, and cyber, and interconnectivity, and artificial intelligence, and. Absolutely. But what the recipe will be like, I've got absolutely no idea, if I'm honest.
I think there's an echo. I feel, we started off this interview talking about counterintelligence taking up the job, being the job of the army instead of its traditional role. Do you think there's a risk here that people will lean too heavily into drones and new tech, and that'll be to the detriment of the basic stuff?